Hi, Nick. Good morning and welcome to Inside the Foundry. Thank you so much for your time. It was great syncing up last week, and I'm sure we'll have a really cool conversation.
Thanks again, Prithvi, for inviting me on the podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. So, Nick, why don't we start with a quick intro about yourself?
Sure. I am Nick Fornicola. I am currently the Data Technology Director at Beusa Energy. Beusa is a really interesting company with a number of companies in its family of businesses, so it's a really exciting place to be. A little bit of history about me. I graduated from Penn State with a petroleum engineering degree and worked for Chevron as well as an agriculture company until I found my way to Visa.
Really cool. Super. So, you grew up around farms and machinery in rural Pennsylvania, you said. So, when you look back at that, what do you think it was about that environment that taught you about how the world works? Like, how do people work? How do things work? How does life work?
I don't think there's a better way to grow up than to grow up farming, which is increasingly rare nowadays, as you can imagine. Growing up in that environment, it teaches you at a young age about work ethic, of
Mhm.
course, the value of a dollar, because I don't know, but generally speaking, farming and agriculture isn't a really lucrative business, especially for small family farms in central Pennsylvania specifically. It's a way of life, right? They don't do it for the money, they do it because they love to do it. So it teaches you about what hard work is truly and the value of the money that you do make. I think I was like 8 or 9 when I first started that work, and I just stuck with it through middle school, high school, and college. And yeah, it was nice to have some side cash or whatever, but I really enjoyed the work itself and learning all the life lessons that it teaches you about business. Some of the transactions that you make are maybe a little unique, trading livestock for equipment or something like that. But it's a great environment to grow up in, and it teaches you about all kinds of elements of life that they're still relevant today. I still
Right.
carry those lessons with me.
That's cool. And it kind of contrasts with much of how the usual world grows up in a very urban academic setting. The reason I say that is with growing up on a farm, like you just mentioned, you get a more generalist view of, you get to do a lot of things, right? Versus on the flip side, the narrative is that someone specializes in whatever their passion is, if you want to call it that. The difference there has a lot of implications, right? Because someone who's grown up on a farm like you, because they've done so much work across the board, understand the beauty of work itself. It's not tied to something they're passionate about because passions are fleeting, right? Whereas on the other side, you have people saying, hey, I really want to be a musician because I grew up playing the piano, for example, or I want to make movies, or I want to be in tech, etc., etc. Have you seen that? Do you think just doing so many different things, right, informed the appreciation you have for work? And sure, you have your passions too, right? So what's the line in between? Is there a line between the two for you, or is there not?
I definitely think that there is a very distinct line between your passions, which typically end up being your hobbies in adult life, and maybe what you were born to do or meant to do, whatever you want to call it. But growing up in the environment that I did, it really guided me towards where I am today. I think that there wasn't ever the desire to escape that environment. It wasn't a story of, I got to get out of this small farm town type mentality. I actually still live in the same town that I grew up in. Yeah. So there's definitely none of that going on, but it helps you realize maybe the very different ends of the spectrum that you can
Mhm.
take. At the end of the day, you're going to earn a dollar. And
Right.
generally speaking, people do what they need to do to support their families. And whether that's a career in agriculture or farming or owning your farm or a career in tech, It's a job at the end of the day. But having grown up in that environment, as you called out, I got to experience a lot of different things. I got to see my friends grow up in that more traditional sense where they played an instrument, so they wanted to be a musician, or they spent time playing video games, which led them to being game developers or something like that. So I saw that. I got to experience that because I was a normal kid too. Like I had my passions and hobbies when I was a kid, but I also got an early taste of the real world and the environment that kind of is around you in that real world and all the different things that one needs to concern themselves with as an adult. Maybe I got that a little early, and I think most farm kids do. So I'm not unique in that, but I think that might be straying a little bit away from the question here, but I think that growing up in that way allowed me to realize what I wanted and what I didn't want out of life.
Ah, okay. Very interesting. Super cool. You've always tinkered around with stuff when growing up, right? So, when did it occur to you that you cared about a very cause and effect school of thought, like an engineering school of thought? Everything has some foundational principle. This is why this exists, here's how it should work, and then if it works, this is what happens.
Yeah, it's a natural thing that you have to at least be competent at when you're operating equipment that, your livelihood depends on. So I got into that having to fix equipment, which turned into that's really interesting. This complex system, like take maybe a hay baler, for example. Hay on the ground goes in and it gets spit out into this nice little neat square. What's going on inside there? And then either being forced to fix it or just out of sheer curiosity, like how does that work? And then when you figure out how it works, maybe mechanically, that spiraled into, as I got older and learned what physics are and things like that, like what are the physics behind this? What are the really foundational elements? Trying to put myself in the designer's chair. What am I concerned about here? Why does this gear have to have 12 teeth instead of maybe 6 teeth or something like that, which eventually turned into pursuing an engineering degree.
So, you sound like you prefer function over form because when you take care of function, the form takes care of itself in a way. Is that something you
Exactly.
believe in?
100%. I think you probably talk to a lot of farmers around here, anywhere today, and they see this complex equipment ingrained with electronics and technology, and most of them would prefer a 1970s, 1980s piece of equipment, minimal electronics, minimal technology, hard parts, if you will. I adopted a lot of that mentality and have carried it with me even into the systems I design today around data and applications and things like that.
Yeah, build them simple and make them fixable.
Exactly. Yep.
That's the opposite of the German way, I think. So you started off on offshore rigs, and then life there is very, very different. It depends on precision. There's a lot of physical grit involved. So what did that teach you in terms of how you look at comfort or convenience?
That's an interesting question. So you're right. The environment offshore in the oil field world is much more complex than what you'll find on land. And it has to be for a number of reasons. Safety, of course, being the primary concern, but just think of the sheer costs involved with that operation. Some rigs run a daily burn rate on an offshore rig is it's not unusual for it to be $1 million a day. The return is much greater offshore, of course, which is why those investments make sense. But working in that environment helped me put into perspective what might seem like a nice to have in one environment is a necessity in a completely different environment. For example, even consider something silly like the living quarters offshore. They're very accommodating, but they almost have to be considering the environment people are in. They're away for 3 to 4 weeks at a time. They're confined to this pretty small space. Little things like that can go a long way for the human psyche when they're in those types of environment. And that's just a silly example. We could talk about all of the parallels, what goes on the rig floor or on the deck. with the logistics that occur there, and all of those very, very advanced pieces of equipment or processes are all 100% necessary in that environment.
Right. Cool. So you said you've been through a peculiar cycle, right? You've been laid off and then got back. And I don't remember if that's happened once or if it happened twice. So how did that entire journey shape your view on risk versus stability?
Yeah, yep. So I was laid off just once in 2016, I think, around that time. And the company I worked for was going through layoffs, and there was a pretty large population of the workforce that was laid off. It wasn't unusual, and
Right.
I wasn't honestly quite that surprised. But at that point in time, I had a decision to make. Do I continue in this industry and take the risk again, or do I branch out into something more stable? And at the time, I was starting a family, I was engaged, and we were getting married soon. And I took the safe route. I went to a more stable industry. I went back into agriculture in a different capacity, and we got our life straightened out, not straightened out. We got settled down a little bit, if you will, got our bearings straight, and it was boring. It was like same kind of stuff every day, and it didn't feel that fulfilling. So what that taught me about risk versus comfort or risk versus stability is while feeling comfortable might feel good for a short time, I'm the type of person where I need a little bit of excitement, maybe a little bit of that risk, as long as what I'm doing fulfills me as far as
Mhm.
work is concerned, then the risk is worth it. So I made the decision to go back into the oil and gas industry, oil and energy industry, and haven't looked back since.
Super. And then you said someone in the office noticed how good you were at like putting data together and pulling reports. So a lot of people today don't understand the importance of making their work visible, right? They actually downplay it. They expect that, hey, I do good work, my work should speak for itself, and it doesn't happen, right? Now, there's different ways to make it visible, right? You can shout from a rooftop versus it can be much more subtle. What is that moment where someone noticed what you were doing and then said, hey, this guy puts data together or this guy presents data? What did that moment tell you about visibility for your work that you probably were not aware of before?
It told me really everything. When that happened, that was an inflection point in my career. And it was really a convergence of what I was doing and what I wanted to do in the future. And you're right, visibility into your work can look a number of different ways. There are better ways than other, but it doesn't have to be shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes that's not the best approach at all. Honestly, what it was and what really resonates with me even to this day is being proactive in your approach to what's going on around you. So for me, I was working across a number of different data vans. And we, of course, stream sensor data into those data vans. And I noticed like the streaming layout for each data van was different. I'd go to this fleet and we'd have maybe 1,000 tags, and I'd go to a different fleet and there might be 1,500. And some fleets were able to visualize data better than others because they just weren't streaming data as best as they could. So I just sent an email off to the person at the time that controlled that stuff. And I said, hey, I was noticing this. Might I recommend we standardize the ingestion into the data van so when you walk into one data van and go to a different one, you're walking into the same thing from a
Right.
streaming perspective. So it's just little things like that. I didn't have to blast an email out to the entire company and tell them that I was doing something. It's really the right people need to notice.
Got it. Yeah, that's a smart way to put it. Actually, maybe not everyone needs to know. Maybe it's not a good thing for everyone. All right, so at Beusa, your role spans driving, engineering, AI, field ops, data, and each speaks its own language. Each is its own living ecosystem. Right? How do you create alignment, or how do you orchestrate everything together in a way that not only makes sense for the business but also the people on your teams?
A lot of conversations.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's much more nuanced than that. It all starts with having a lot of conversations. I think, as with anything with data, aligning with business value is and should be the number one priority. We can do a lot of cool tech things, but they're pointless if they don't benefit the business in some way. So the first and my primary focus is whatever we're doing, making sure that it is aligning with the goals of the business. And we have a lot of goals. So there's a lot of things that we can and should be doing that we are. But beyond that, it's maybe systems and infrastructure and all that aside. Those are the easy things to figure out, if you will. Maybe they're a bit more than table stakes, but they're the easier things to figure out. The place where I focus a lot of my time is on the people that I manage, making sure they understand the strategy, they understand the North Star. I've communicated well, like where we are right now and where we need to be and how they fit in their role specifically to that vision in North Star and what they need to do to get there. So it's just leadership at its core, right? Is just making sure that I'm the best leader that I can be for them and for the business.
So what are, like, maybe now, maybe in the past, what are a couple of, like, pivotal moments in people leadership that were expansive to you? It unlocked a new mental model, or you saw something that you couldn't consider before because you weren't aware.
Oh my gosh, there are so many. I've learned a lot about people in the past 5 years. Obviously, management and leadership it's all about people. And there have been a number of things that have happened over the course of the years that have opened my eyes about how to best manage people or how to maybe deal with some people differently than you deal with others. But I think I would say the most enlightening thing, and this is going to sound really simple when I say it, but the most enlightening thing that I've ever heard came from my executive coach, which Beusa is kind enough to put us, all of their leaders, through leadership training and
That's
provide us an
great.
executive coach. Yeah, it's really awesome. So in the course of this conversation I was having with my coach one day, we were talking about a specific roadblock that I was having, and she asked me, she said, "Nick, are you being kind or are you being nice?" And I asked her what the difference was. And she says, "It's really easy to be nice to someone. You do it all the time. You're just a nice guy. But being kind is being clear, whether that clarity is coming through positive or negative feedback." So, what I took away from that and the term that she bestowed upon me was clarity is kindness. You can work through a lot and avoid a lot of potentially bad situations by being clear up front
Right.
about expectations or deliverables, due dates, whatever it is. Clarity is kindness. Always be kind. Don't be nice.
Really cool. That is simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I would say being nice is like mostly avoiding conflict, right? Versus being kind is enabling someone. Now, that could be through negative feedback as well, like you said. That makes total sense.
It's really easy to be nice. Yeah.
Okay, so you've launched a few Gen AI initiatives internally at Beusa, and Beusa is a high stakes, consistency driven environment. So what were challenges that you faced, if any? And then what did you learn along the journey? As in, I've talked to people, for example, who've said, "Hey, we started doing this thing internally, but it was hard to scale because while a lot of people are talking about the technological limitations of AI, we looked at what it would take to support something if it made to prod, right? We need resources to manage it. They're not going to be cheap. A lot of them don't know what they're doing. So, we're not that mature yet. Did you run into any of those challenges? And then if you did, what did you do to address those?
Yeah, great question. So we took a very careful approach to generative AI. We strategized on it for a while. I think 6 months we talked about it internally before we ever came up with a solid plan that we wanted to execute. And to put it simply, we came to the realization that there are companies that have battle scars that we just don't need. We don't need our own foundational model. We might not even need our own fine-tuned model. But we effectively landed on only build your differentiators. You don't need to build the foundational stuff. OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, they have the battle scars of creating foundational models and fine-tuning models and all of that stuff that I don't need in my line of work anyways. What I do need is agents that handle specific processes and chat bots or RAG-based implementations that reference certain documents. I can't buy those off the shelf. So all the infrastructure, hosting, and all that, we don't need it. We're going to focus on building what differentiates us in the market and buy the
Right.
rest.
That's a really smart way to think of it. And then, so here's the follow-up question then. If you're thinking about building what differentiates you in the market, so are your competitors, right? So you don't think there'll be overlap, and then have you given any thought to that? How do you think about that angle?
Yeah, so you're right. Our competitors likely are doing a lot of the same things. Oil and gas it's unique. There isn't a lot of cross collaboration between operators or service companies because we are all in competition with one another, maybe not directly at any
Right,
given
right,
point in time. So, quite honestly, there's not a lot of visibility into what our competitors are doing. There's some that we can get through press releases and things that they choose to share.
right.
But as with us, there's much more going on internally than
Right.
what you might see on LinkedIn or something like that.
Cool. So a lot of the good stuff is happening from internal signals, not external triggers, it looks like.
Yeah, and I think like the way we know we're succeeding is through the contracts that we sign
Right.
and the customers that we get, because increasingly operators really care about digital capability. So it's a good sign when we're re-signing contracts or signing new contracts or anything like that. It at least tells me that when those types of questions are on an RFP or something and we give the answer, that we're doing the right things.
Really cool. So you're also tracking the right metrics. You're making Beusa sound like it's a really zen place to work at where everything's figured out, by the way. Because you're like, hey, we're only building what we wanted that will differentiate us in the market. And then a lot of it is internal. It's like we're not reacting to external triggers. And then how do we track it? How do we know it works? Is when we look at happy customers. So that's really cool. You know, it's hard to find businesses which have their head and heart in the right place, especially now with all the noise around AI.
Yeah, yep. Busa is a fantastic place to work, and we have a lot figured out. We have our own battle scars, if you
Right.
will. Across the business, we're always looking to improve in whatever we do, whatever it is. So, as much as we've got figured out today, we're a company that's been built on innovation, and we're always looking for ways to innovate. And to innovate, you need information. When I maybe mention certain metrics or things like that, it's usually a product of needing to innovate and needing that information. But Busa, like I said, Busa is a fantastic place to work, and the executive leadership, they do have their head and heart in the right place. I will say that.
Awesome. I'm happy for you. It's great. So, with in terms of ROI, carrying on the theme, you said that with data products, for most tech initiatives, you see the biggest ROI in field focused products, which was a surprise to me because I was not expecting that. I was expecting it would have something to do on the customer side of things or on the business ops side of things. So, can you share maybe an example of an initiative that was a big enabler for field ops? Could be something specific or it could be something that helped the org as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's just maybe consider a frac fleet or a turbine or one of our field assets. They're our moneymaker. They are what generates revenue. So
Right,
if we're pumping, we're creating revenue. If we're not pumping, we're not creating revenue. If that turbine is running, it's creating revenue. If it's not running, it's not. So the operating model is pretty simple. You're either running and making money, or you're not, and you're not making money, which is an opportunity cost. Way, way back, like 5 years ago, these operational data sets, they weren't leveraged to the degree to which I thought they could be. And we started small, we started simple. Okay. We have a bunch of maintenance data for our pump trailers or whatever asset. Let's analyze this data. Let's create some maintenance plans, for example, on what this historical data is telling us and iterate from there. You have pieces of equipment that cost millions of dollars and components on these pieces of equipment that, you know, are huge R&M expense drivers. If you can find a way to extend the life of those components, you've done a couple of things. One, you spent less money on those components over time. And two, you have reduced the amount of time that the asset is not working. So it has more uptime now. So you're generating revenue. And that was just step one, right? From there, the possibilities are endless, right? Think about predictive maintenance and machine learning. Now you can augment that machine learning with Gen AI capabilities and everything you can do with that. I was surprised to hear that. It was surprising for you to hear that was some of our more valuable data.
Maybe I assume that organizations would already be on top of that data and operationalizing it. Maybe that's why it caught me off guard. But it doesn't look like it because now it makes sense because, hey, that's critical to the business. That's where we earn our bread and butter. Makes sense.
Yeah, I could be wrong, and I'm just making assumptions based on feedback that we've gotten from some customers. But I think often the degree to which companies leverage that type of data is overstated. Not in every case. I don't want to say that, but you hear, I would say, less about it than I would anticipate. So maybe your observations aren't completely unfounded.
Fair enough. So, in everything you do with data stuff for Beusa, I'm sure speed is of essence, urgency is of essence. So, I'm sure there's a lot of times where there's a lot of pressure and data moves so fast that there's constant feedback loops on the other side. And then, in order to keep things moving or get through, you need focus, right? Now, I know you are into long range precision shooting. I would say there's these three exact same things necessary there, right? You need a lot of patience, focus, and it is high pressure by the nature of it. You either hit your target or you miss it, right? And there's physicality to it also. And then there is an immediate feedback loop. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you have work superpowers that you gain because of your whole love for long range shooting?
Oh man, I had actually never thought about it in that perspective. But yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's the other way around. I'm an okay shooter because of the environment at work.
It could be, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I
that's
mean, we
that's
know
an
there's a yin and yang. We don't know which one's the yin and which one's the yang.
yeah, true chicken and egg scenario. But no, you're exactly right. There's pressure for sure, which I think there's good pressure and there's bad pressure. Stress, if you want to call it that. There's good stress and bad stress. This is healthy stress, I think. It's the type of stress that forces you to be the best kind of person and worker in your domain that you can be. It's not like a startup environment where you're working 18 hours a day or something like that. And then, yeah, there's immediate feedback. People are looking for very specific things. And if that thing isn't delivered, you'll know pretty quickly. And you'll know if you have to readjust your approach or anything like that. But what comes out of that process at the end of the day is typically a really good data product, a data product that serves a need, that solves a problem, that makes someone else's life better, hopefully. And that's extremely gratifying.
Really cool. Are there situations where your mind goes back to shooting, for example? And the reason I ask is my mind goes to shooting sometimes. I don't do it as frequently, or I'm not as good as you are, I'm sure of that. But I remember we talked about this book the last time we spoke, right? I was going to send you the name. I did find it out. It's called A Shot at History. I will send you the link to the book. But reading that book, it's all about focus and discipline at the end of the day. And that's what fascinates me about shooting, is because it takes immense strength, both physical and mental. And that strength on the physical side of it, it's more the negation of it, it's more control. It's trying to not do something, right? You're not constantly lifting weights, or you're not hauling a huge tire across a workshop. You're trying not to make certain muscle movements. You're trying not to have thoughts. And that's why when I'm usually faced with the bad kind of stress at work, or even the good kinds, right? Because in the beginning, you don't know what kind it is. My mind goes back to shooting and golf because they're both very focused, disciplined sports. You can only get good if your mind is silent. And once the mind is silent, right, we don't react to stuff. And I'm like, okay, here's what the mess is. What do we do about it versus reacting to it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In shooting, there is a lot of, as there is in work, there are a lot of external factors at play, the noise, if you will. Some of those you need to pay attention to, some of those you need to ignore, and filtering through that noise is the challenging part. So my mind does go to shooting quite often at work and in other areas of life, I would say as well,
Right, right.
because when you think about what all needs to happen before you pull the trigger, so to
Mhm.
speak, there's a lot that goes into that. And as you said, focusing on what needs to be considered and what not, what does
Right.
not, is the challenge.
Really cool. You have been through and looked at transformation professionally, right? You went from field to data to leadership. And then you've seen the whole digital transformation, and then the cloud plus, and now AI, right? On the business and enterprise side of things. And yet you live in the town that you grew up in, right? So, what do you think about transformation from a very human perspective, right? What does it mean? How have you transformed? Or what do you think is important when someone looks at transforming themselves from a human standpoint?
I don't know that there's any better word than transformation that describes itself so perfectly. Because what does it take for someone to transform themselves? There are a couple different ways you can look at that, or at least how I look at it from where I sit. Some people might say I'm transformed from, who I used to be, but I don't think that at all. That's an outsider's perspective looking in. I'm still the same person. The question is, what does it take for someone to transform themselves? It takes a couple of tactical things like introspection. You have to think deeply to yourself about, do you want to change? What do you want to be? And how do you do it? And the same applies to business, right? When you want to transform a business in one area, what do you want to be as a
Right.
business? Or what do you want to be as a department or as a leader, so on and so forth? And then how do you get there? Are all things that happen along the journey of transformation.
Awesome. So, how's the rest of your week looking?
Oh, it's shaping up to be a busy one, as they all are. Of course, we're approaching the end of our fiscal year, so a lot of budget planning and team planning, resource planning, which is always exciting. I always jump at the opportunity to add new team members if they get approved.
Oh, okay. Now I see what's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
I always hope that can happen at the end of the year. And there are some roles that I think we need filled given where we're at. So
Cool.
hoping for the best there.
And Nick, you didn't answer it, but then you alluded it, right? The question about transformation, the way you answered is, hey, what's as is and what's to be? In assessing that as is, I think the first step, going back to our talk about kindness, is kindness, right?
You're
You have to
right.
be kind to yourself. In order to kickstart that journey, you can't do it if you're nice to yourself. Because if I wanted to transform myself physically, I have to be kind and therefore honest with myself. Being nice is, oh, I'm gonna go to Steak and Shake and get a, what is that, Biscoff shake. It just struck me that, hey, you know what? Everything he said centered around his original point, which was kindness.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. To transform, you likely need to be kind to yourself and
Right,
be honest and give yourself the feedback that you need, not the
right,
feedback that you want to hear. And again, there's parallels to
right.
business
Yes.
transformation in there as well.
Yeah, you have to be kind to your employees, kind to your customers, etc., etc.
Yep,
All right,
100%.
Nick. Super cool. We'll stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Prithvi. Feel free to contact me at any time if you ever want to do this again. This was fun.
Thank you so much. Yes, it was fun. Cheers.
All right. Thanks.